Do you have a bad memory? I've been researching and reading a lot about how to improve your memory recently, and I have come to the conclusion that I don't have a bad memory, I simply have an untrained memory. The idea that your memory can be untrained was a little bit strange to me at first, but by practicing a few simple techniques, I have found that it is easy to improve your memory and your ability to recall information. Now, some of you may know of the famous detective, a fictional detective named Sherlock Holmes. Now, Sherlock Holmes is famous for many things, but one of the things that he is famous for, even though he is fictitious, is his ability to remember any piece of information months, years, or even decades after he has received that information. During my research, I have come across some of the principles used by people with great memories to help them remember any kind of information, and I am going to share what I have learnt with you. So, how does your brain remember and recall information? Well, scientists have done lots of research into this, and there are a number of principles at play in your mind at any one time. The first principle is known as primacy, which basically means that our brains are wired to remember the first piece of information that it receives. So if somebody gives you a long list of names or numbers or things, you will probably remember the first and the second and maybe the third quite easily, but after that it does become difficult to remember random pieces of information. The second principle is recency. Our brains are also wired to remember the most recent information we receive. So we're very good at recalling the first things and the last things. It's the bits in between that we find difficult. However, we can learn to train our brain to remember those bits in the middle through organization. If we organize the data or the information, it is easier for us to recall. Likewise, it is easier for us to recall information if we attach emotions to the data that we have. Anything that we are already familiar with will also be easier to recall, and anything that is different or anything that stands out from the rest of the information that you have will also be easier to recall and easier to remember. So familiarity and difference allow us to remember. Next we have association. If we can associate one piece of information that is new to a piece of information that already exists within our memory, then that again will allow us to remember the new information easier. And finally, visualizations, which is how the famous detective Sherlock Holmes remembers information. He turns boring data or notes or dates into visual images which are easier for our brains to remember and therefore easier for us to recall. So, if you believe that you have a bad memory, remember, you do not have a bad memory, you have an untrained memory, and it is possible to train your memory to make it easier to recall information. You just need to start practicing.